As we've now reached the starting time for the event, I'll commence. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the third of Professionals in International Trade events for 2021. My name is Bill Cole. I represent Professionals in International Trade in the capacity of the Board Director in charge of International Trade Policy. I'm also a partner at BDO with carriage of international trade issues. It's my great pleasure to open the proceedings tonight, and I think the fact is that we're due for a very, very interesting conversation. Tonight's discussion revolves around one of the key issues of international trade in our time, and that is the disruption and integration brought about by artificial intelligence and digital applications. In examining these issues, we've assembled a panel of experts who will provide, I think, a rich and challenging exchange on these matters. Before we go into that, firstly, I'd like to introduce you, if you're not aware, to the Professionals in International Trade organisation. It was founded to connect and support like-minded individuals who work and share common interests in international trade and investment, business and foreign affairs. Professionals in International Trade's aim is to create opportunities for members to connect both socially and at a professional level, and to help foster long-term relationships built on trust and business collaboration. And I think part of that those objectives, of course, are engendered and supported by thought leadership and awareness of the various currents affecting international trade. So I think tonight fits very, very comfortably within our ambit of our goals. In terms of housekeeping, you'll find that there is a Q&A chat box in the middle of your screen, which will allow you to submit questions in real time as the various speakers explain their expositions. And it's possible, of course, to post questions during the session. The speakers will make their best efforts, of course, to answer those as the discussion continues. One of the great elements of this evening is that the discussion is brought about by one of our partners, represented by Noor Gomez from the Queensland AI Hub. And welcome tonight, Noor. I'd like to pass over proceedings to you so that you could introduce our panel of experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I believe we have a broad audience from all over the world, so it's really great to see that. Just a quick brief note, I guess, on the Queensland AI Hub. It's a newly launched initiative. We've been around for 10 months approximately, and we're here to build the AI ecosystem across Queensland and Australia more broadly. I'm the Strategic Partnerships Manager at the Queensland AI Hub, and I also sit on the Board of Directors of the Australian AI Collective, which is a national body for representing industry across AI in Australia. I won't take any more thunder minutes from our great panelists, and I will introduce to you our moderator for this evening, Marek Kowalkiewicz. He is a member of the advisory board at the Queensland AI Hub, but also the founding director of the Centre of the Digital Economy at the Queensland University of Technology. An AI great thought leader himself. So I'll hand over to you, Marek, and enjoy, everyone.
Thank you so much, Noor. Thank you so much, Bill. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Marek Kowalkiewicz, professor and founding director of the Center for the Digital Economy at QUT, and also a member of the advisory board of Queensland Artificial Intelligence Hub. What Noor didn't mention, I have an army of robots all around my house that take care of everything that's happening here, everywhere. So that's one of my passions. I absolutely love exploring the so-called business of technology and translating all the newest, all the greatest, the bleeding edge technology, and trying to translate the impact of them on what is happening in the industry. And today's event is a fantastic opportunity to discuss just that. We're going to discuss the impact of artificial intelligence on international trade and investment. Some of the questions that we'll be asking are, can we trust artificial intelligence in investment decisions? If yes, then how? What is the potential impact of AI on transaction costs in international trade? Seeing how interconnected the world is these days, what are some new ways to better detect opportunities and threats when growing your business globally? These are some of the topics that our panelists will discuss today, but we'll have some more. I'm expecting to hear about unexpected uses of artificial intelligence. Some of our panelists might talk about what happened over 50 years of exploration in that space of artificial intelligence, and we'll talk about the need for a human in the loop. No pressure there, my dear panelists. And so to introduce them, and if I could please ask you to wave your hand when I mention you, Dr. Jasmine Muir. She's the Earth Observation Technical Lead at FrontierSI. She's passionate about promoting the continued growth of the Earth observation sector. Yes, there is an Earth observation sector. She encourages and trains the next generation of scientists and integrates that research into industry. We've had some wonderful exchanges with Jasmine about using Earth observation as a source of data for decision making, and we'll hear more about it from Jasmine. We have Michael Guihot, Dr. Michael Guihot, a senior lecturer at Queensland University of Technology, as well as the deputy chair at the Society on Social Implications of Technology, Australia. His research focuses on technology law, and that includes comparative studies of commercial, economic, and social implications of development of AI and robotics, and resulting global and regional shifts in power structures, right? The world is clearly changing in front of us as we speak. We also have Dr. Murat Unal, founder and chief intelligence officer, Network Science and AI Lab of SONEAN. And Murat focuses his work on the narrow AI, which is, machine learning, natural language processing, autonomous vehicles, and robotics. So those types of AI that are very good at some very specific aspects of what they're doing. But he's also looking at human-computer interaction, platform technologies, and above all, network science. So bringing it all together to really try to understand those complex systems and how those complex systems will be a core building block for future breakthroughs in our research. So we have three doctors, Dr. Jasmine, Dr. Michael, and Dr. Murat, and we're going to start with Jasmine, and each of the panelists will cover their topic for about 5 minutes. Then we're going to get back together to discuss the various aspects of their presentations, and I'll have quite a lot of questions. In the meantime, everyone, please post your questions as well through the Q&A part of the function of this seminar, and then we'll have some additional time to make sure we cover some of the most juicy and most exciting questions that you will ask. That's me. Over to you, Jasmine.
Thank you, Mark. And thank you to professionals in international trade and Queensland AI Hub for the opportunity to be here tonight. So as Mark mentioned, I'm an Earth observation scientist, and you're probably wondering how that relates to international trade and investment. Earth observation is a technology that allows you to observe the world from afar, and it has a lot of applications in supply chain investment, looking at areas around the world where you might have products that are being produced, where you can take them, where you have assets, and monitoring them either in real time or looking at historical analysis. So typically the area that I look at is satellite images. Satellite images, they can be captured at very large resolution, so you can be looking at very large areas and monitoring those areas over long periods of time to get the information that you need. How does this relate to AI? AI is one of the methods that is used to analyze the information that comes out of these images. You can use it to do things like classify buildings. You can look at individual parcels of land and start to incorporate that information into other models that you may have that have other data that is related to things like the assets or the customers or clients that you have. And when I started thinking about what to present here tonight, I was thinking about how do we know that this data is trustworthy? And that's really important when you're dealing with investment decisions. When you're shifting large sums of money and you might need to compare one type of investment to another. That's one of the things that we need to consider when we're using any data source. So it's the quality of the data that you're getting in, as well as the human interactions with that data. So how are you extracting your training data for your analytics and your models? How accurate are they at the end of it? And also recording that information so you have provenance, so you have transparency, and so that you know where that information has come from. So a little bit more about how I'm interested in the finance and trade sector. FrontierSI has been working with the Australian Federal Government Department, Geoscience Australia, to do industry engagement. So what we've found with the finance sector is a lot of people aren't aware of this resource that's available, and bringing that awareness into industry is really allowing new impacts to be made. So things such as incorporating it into finance products where people are monitoring changes in natural hazards or climate risk, ESG reporting. There's all sorts of applications that can happen. One example is using it to monitor commodities. So things such as think of cereal production, knowing how much you have in one particular area, your region, then you can start looking at the logistics, the supply chain, start forecasting the demand as well. And then you can start making predictions on what kind of selling prices that you might have in a particular area. So I might just leave it there for now, and I'll pass back to you, Marek.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. We're going to have a more detailed question and answer session as we finish that. But just a reminder, to everyone, whenever you have any questions, Jasmine has already touched upon a number of very interesting questions. What triggered my thinking was ESG reporting based on satellite data, right? So that's basically a space that's potentially a bit surprising. If you have any questions, drop them in the Q&A box. So thanks so much, Jasmine. Let's move on to our next panelist, Michael Guihot, who's looking into a particular aspect of regulation in that space of AI. But Michael, let's take it away.
Thanks, Marek. I wanted to touch on a couple of issues, both related to regulation particularly, but another one is efficiency, and the second is regulation. So we often, it's kind of the carrot of AI and the stick of AI. So we often think of the productive efficiencies we can get out of of AI, like those sort of efficiencies you can get out of improving the supply chain, from predicting or even driving consumer demand, monitoring the retail and the warehouse stock, factory production and distribution chains and that sort of thing. But another form of efficiency we can say AI might assist is transaction cost efficiencies, and transactions, being quite interesting to lawyers as well. Those costs of specifying and enforcing contracts that underlie exchanges. So the cost of getting information about your contracting party, the costs of and building contracts that predict some sort of bad behavior on part of your contracting party. Getting all that information costs money and adds to the cost of transacting. And Oliver Williamson, in his transaction cost economics theories, talks about the problems being, some of the problems with uncertainty being asymmetric information, so one party having more information than the other, but also this thing called opportunism, what he called opportunism, and which was presuming that your counterpart will try to do you over, presuming your counterpart will try to undermine you or take from you. So what you have to do in that case, if you're thinking ahead, is to draft longer and more involved contracts to predict what the person's going to do and try to counter it, which costs a lot of money. And what we see though with the use of AI and the shortening of this contracting process is we see sort of automated contracting, not so much smart contracting that was popular a few years ago, sort of reliant on blockchain, but that sort of automated contracting, where parties are able to access quickly drafted contracts, and which cut out, intermediaries, that cuts out the bank, cuts out agents, and it cuts out the enforcement costs of courts, because they're sort of self-enforcing and happen immediately. So other sort of examples might include, algo trading, that sort of algorithmic trading, where you cut out the human frailties in the transactions. You get massive speed and frequency advantages, but you also cut out human trader emotion, greed, intuition and superstition, those sorts of things where you can imagine the trader sort of holding on for one last go on a trade and then losing it all. The algorithmic trading doesn't do that. It sort of spots gaps in the market and buys and sells when it's designed to, and moves on. Now, the other part of it, of what I talk about, is the difficulty in regulating AI. How do you regulate AI? It's like regulating. I refer to it sometimes like regulating water. Which water are you talking about? Are you talking about the oceans? Are you talking about rivers? Are you talking about sewer water? Are you talking about drinking water, potable water? Regulating AI is a difficult thing, not only because of the problems in defining AI, firstly, but also a number of other things, like regulations always seen as reactive, responding to problems, not proactive. That some of these big AI firms have the market covered, and regulators find it difficult to get into the game and that sort of thing. So the EU, as we saw last week or the week before, has proposed a draft regulation, and it doesn't do a bad job, and it's the kind of first to market on regulating AI. It's looking to harmonise the rules for artificial intelligence across Europe. And so maybe we can talk a bit about that as well. So that's me, Marek.
Very exciting, Michael. Thank you so much for this. I think this is a pretty interesting space, and I will definitely want to ask some questions about algorithmic trading. What could possibly go wrong when you have two algorithms trading with one another? And I have some examples that you might be aware of, but I'll mention them when we have a Q&A. A reminder to everyone: please click on the Q&A icon. Hopefully you can see it on the bottom of your screen and add your questions there. I am monitoring the questions that are popping up in the chat as well. However, the best way is to ask them in the Q&A function, so that other participants can upvote and perhaps comment on those questions. Remember about that. I'm still not seeing any questions in the Q&A, so please add them there. Murat, let's move to you and your 5 minutes presentation. I was really excited when you shared some of your points with me about the fact that we've been looking to that space for over 60 years, right? So what's happening there? What have we learned? What's coming? Murat.
Yeah, let me focus 2 minutes on the whole AI discussion before I move into what really will drive some of the decisions in international trade, which we think is ecosystem intelligence. Now, AI has been clearly around for over 60 years now. It has gone through multiple AI winters, and typically the interest for AI correlated highly with easily accessible money in the market. So yes, we are living an AI hype, but we have lived through these hypes, quite a few times before. In my view, a lot of the stuff that is presented nowadays is actually human intelligence packaged as artificial intelligence. But there is no such thing as artificial intelligence or general artificial intelligence. It's all narrow artificial intelligence. So it's machines acting seemingly in an intelligent way in a very defined space. And the 3 main areas I would like to make it more tangible, as you know, are machine learning, it's natural language processing, and it's also robotics. And in natural language processing, we have areas like machine translation, machine search, semantic analysis, text generation, text extraction, and so forth. And all those narrow spaces have their flaws. We talk about flaws, for example, in machine learning. When we do supervised machine learning, where we connect input to output data and train the systems to uncover patterns. Bear in mind, in supervised machine learning, most of the activities we engage in are actually algorithms that are based on statistics. So we're packaging machine learning as something, out of space, but we're applying the kind of statistics that we have applied the last decades. And this is why I mentioned narrow AI. We haven't even figured out our own complexity. We have 100 billion neurons. We have no idea how they're connected. How can we develop something that actually reaches the kind of potential that we as humans have? And this is why humans need to be in the loop. This is why technology needs to empower humans to take better decisions. The technology itself is just a tool. At some point, it might become a peer or even start managing us. But of course, it depends on the kinds of decisions we want to take. And how can you use AI or machine learning, natural language processing, and for example, robotics more and more as tools? This is a question that I asked myself, for example, during my doctorate about 14 years ago, when I focused on network science and network analysis. I figured out, oh my gosh, well, the world is a giant ecosystem where everything is connected. And how can I understand a complex ecosystem if I don't know the individual components and how they are connected? Well, if you, for example, are a company in Australia that wants to go global, you want to know what the networks in all the countries that you operate in look like. Who's cooperating with whom? Who are the governments? How are organizations connected to each other at project level? Who's buying whose products? These are all networks. And so we ended up developing something we called and coined ecosystem intelligence. And in 2015, our first customers actually was and still is one of the largest agriculture and technology companies in the world, applying this now on an international scale for the last 6-7 years. And we've moved into other industries. So what is ecosystem intelligence about? So think for a second, you have an intelligence at your disposal that only speaks to you in a single target language, where you use machine translation and the human in the loop to make sure that all the data, like Jasmine said, are super verified. You don't just leave it to the machine. It's a network model that you update daily that guides you globally. You know all the networks of your customers, your competitors, literally the governments, the universities that are part of the network, and you can tap into those networks by country. And the system allows you to monitor the primary sources of those players in the network. So you have a network model that runs your indexation search, and then you collect signals from all over the world that those organizations are, communicating. Signals could be a customer teaming up with a new competitor, a government releasing new subsidies, a competitor increasing capacity in Brazil. And if you now look at it from a network perspective, what starts as an organizational network, knowing who's connected to whom, customers, competitors, universities, etc., is then being connected to signals, to developments across the world. So you move into what I would term a knowledge graph or a meta network, where everything gets connected. And that allows you then to query the data and get answers within seconds to all the questions that you have, rather than having to look for them for 5 or 6 weeks. What does it mean? You can make better informed decision using technology. You can use machine learning, the whole area of natural language processing, and multiple other areas to make sure that you pick up relevant data. But ultimately, it's the human in the loop that makes sure that the data is of utmost quality, because like in machine translation, you can't really accept 47 or 57% accuracy. You want 99.9 whatever percent accuracy. And this is where the human always should come into the loop, because ultimately it's all about doing away with routine work, empowering people to do better, and using technology to do exactly that. That's it from my side.
Thank you, Murat. This sounds very, very exciting. We're starting our 20 minutes for a discussion between all of the panelists at the moment. I'm going to stick with you, Murat, and sort of build on top of what you just shared with us. I think it's a fascinating concept. In some ways, it's kind of a, you called it a meta network. It's a bit of a hive mind as well, right? It's the sort of the intelligence of the entire network. It does sound powerful, but the question that I have is, how do we get access to that information about a network, right? It's clearly, do we own all of the channels? And back in the chat, I saw somebody asking a question, how can jurisdictions monitor collusion and unlawful collusion between cross-border AI systems, right? So that also taps into it, right? It's powerful, but who can see those networks?
You see, make no mistake, originally you start in a pretty manual work, like you do with machine learning, and you start tagging, for example, pictures related to cancer or not. And so when you build up a network, there's gigantic information out there in the world. For example, there's communication coming out every day about, for example, let's take agriculture, producers are working with new OEMs and buying their machinery. There's information coming out of OEMs cooperating with others in a certain area. There's a lot of information by governments shared about subsidies, and latest regulations in a specific industry. There's so much. You have to translate those signals into network ties, because ultimately, if you have, let's say, a latest development, let's say an OEM in Australia teaming up with an OEM in the US, an original equipment manufacturer, then from a network point of view, it constitutes a tie between the Australian organization and the American organization. They are both tied to the US and Australia. And if they want to move on that relationship to Asia, they're also tied to Asia. Then the relationship between both, the link is also quantified in the sense that they are cooperating with each other. So you can translate all kinds of signals into real networks. And the signals will have an impact on the networks because it will change on a day-to-day basis. And then you can actually identify, the kind of information that you're looking for, because those networks are not just connected to timestamps or locations or organizations or signals and tags describing those signals. What is this signal about? You can and this is, I think, one of the visions of other companies as well. You can move along that knowledge graph and query the data at its best. What do I mean by that? You can start asking questions like, hey, who of my competitors in this particular product group started a new product in Brazil in the last 3 months? You're no longer basically confined by the kind of Google searches, that are based on page rank and other kind of algorithms built around it. Within a knowledge graph, you can actually ask way more complicated questions. You could ask, for example, who of my competitors in a 50-kilometer radius are currently launching new products? Or what kind of campaigns are they running? Who of them runs discounts in that particular product group? And what are the details? So you're literally no longer confined to many of the problems that you have nowadays. Because when you start thinking along networks, along meta networks, where organizational networks get connected to locations, organizations, signals, and then the signals themselves get tagged, you have highly structured data that you can actually query, using query languages that are available. And you're no longer confined to the problems that a lot of machine learning programs are, for example, subject to.
Thanks, Murat. This is absolutely fascinating. That ability to consume or capture and digest those signals. Now it's almost like an ultimate forensics activity on understanding what's happening around us in the world. And speaking about understanding what's happening around us in the world, another type of ultimate forensics is all those devices that are flying above our heads in the Earth's orbit and taking satellite photos of the Earth. Cue Jasmine. Jasmine, what is your take on using satellite observation as one way of capturing information about those trade networks and collaborations, perhaps between countries or maybe even between organizations?
Thanks, Mark. Following on from what Murat's been talking about, I think satellite imagery and also spatial location data is one type of input that you can use to these type of knowledge networks. It's a way that you can capture spatial patterns as well. So it's not just a signal or the location of something, it's how is this object related to the things around it in the world. So if you're looking at a supply route, that might be something like tracking the location of ships, where is a particular ship at this point in time. But it can also be things like finding out some of the demand factors too. So you could be looking, for example, to see where's new infrastructure being built, and you can add that into the mix of your analysis. Or how advanced are the areas that have been built around a particular new urban center. Another good example of understanding trade networks is looking at the oil supplies. So there's a really nice example that you can look at online, which uses satellite imagery to understand the number of barrels of oil that are around in the different storage facilities around the world. And there's lots of different examples. Another really good one is what is the copper production that is happening at a particular smelter facility.
I find it absolutely amazing to see how much can be done just by analyzing photos, right? I might be oversimplifying things here, right? But just by applying some smarts, and we've seen those analysis of the levels of oil and other reserves by countries, but just by analyzing the length of shadows on on the tankers, right, and on silos. One such example. Michael, I'm very interested about your take from the regulation perspective here, right? You know, are we seeing a potential of emergence of those, you know, all sort of omnipotent, all-knowing organizations that suddenly, you know, trade or grow just because they know more than everyone else? Would we have to then make that information available to others? Would we have to enforce sharing of the data? Are we seeing similar examples already of some organizations knowing more than others and then enforcing access?
Absolutely, yes. We're seeing with big tech companies anyway, almost monopolizing their various areas. I'm interested in hearing from Murat. Is that traceable sort of transacting, or traceable sort of tracing the, you know, the transactions? Is that something that's optional? Is it something that's open, or is it forced?
Oh, what do you mean by forced?
Or is that something that is a requirement of the system, or of the parties to that system? Or because you often see those sort of black box, you know, the black boxy type arguments where these are closed. They're either closed because they're too complex, or they're because of trade secrets, right? They don't want to give away.
Okay. So for example, yeah, we as a company, we took an ethical decision about 10 years ago before we founded. We said, there are some kind of data that we're not going to work on. For example, we don't work on classified data, private data. We only work with publicly available data. And we also focus only on organizational data. What that means is, you know, for example, in agriculture, we're monitoring today about 20,000 organizations in the ecosystem worldwide in 150 plus countries across 300,000 primary sources, machine-based. And those signals are then served to the team, so to say, to check for the relevance, to make sure that they're connected nicely, etc. And the thing is, you can develop such a system for a company and include it and integrate it into their legacy system. But what we also have is what we call it an intelligence as a service solution, where in the future, and bear in mind, we're only opening up, we're not open to the market yet, we're only opening up right now, where we can make that kind of data available, let's say in a Tableau solution or whatever front end, and you can use your intelligent dashboard to query all the data on a global scale to basically empower your decision-making, whether you're investing or whether you're trading with any country in the world.
Yeah, okay, so that's a different sort of structure to one that's, you know, where there is a trade secrets which companies sort of guard, and one where they have patents on the product, and they have a sort of statutory monopoly on, monetizing their product. In those circumstances, yes, you have to regulate, Marek. You have to have pretty strong regulation, and there are some indications in the new EU regulation about transparency in AI, right? So if you're going to have sort of a high risk AI system, then it needs to be transparent. You need to show how it makes its decisions. You need to show how you collected the data, what data you used, how it was processed, the model you used. Then you have to sort of show the chain of decision making. And if that's possible, then these companies will be able to do it. One trick with making these hard regulations and putting these onerous responsibilities on the companies is that sometimes it's only the big companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon who can afford the lawyers and the technologists to be able to comply with that requirement, which is one of those sort of transaction cost arguments anyway. They're the only ones who can comply. So it kind of, by that nature, increases their monopoly, over the systems. So as I say, it's difficult to regulate, but these are just some of the problems.
All right, but if it's difficult, does it mean we just ignore it, or does it mean we put more effort into it?
I don't think we can ignore it. I mean, the Europeans have started. They started, 3 or 4 years ago. They put together a panel of 50 experts, a high-level group on artificial intelligence, and they started hearing from experts, and people submitted 500 submissions, and they've built all this information into this new regulation. So you can see a really long train of introductory comments at the start of the regulation telling its history and how it's developed. Yes, this is an introductory regulation, and will, before it gets put into law, we'll go through a whole series of interactions and a whole series of big corporations trying to change it to limit its scope and limit its applicability. It's hard, but it's necessary. And they say there are 2 things you don't want to be seen being made, that is sausages and laws. It's difficult.
Thanks, Michael. We have a few minutes until we go into the Q&A from our participants. So let's do a couple of sort of short and snappy questions. Jasmine, you make a point that satellite Earth observation is a valuable and cost-effective data source for all sorts of AI analytics, and especially when it's used in finance and investment decisions. How is it cost effective? So, I'm sort of, my background is probably from 20 years ago or 15 years ago. It was immensely expensive, right? Satellite data. Are we at this stage where it actually is affordable for a lot of organizations?
I think there's a few things that have changed in the last 20 years. So you used to have to purchase all of the satellite imagery. You can now get a lot of it available freely. There's also the compute power. So you used to pretty much have to work in either a research or a government institution to be able to use this type of data. With the advent of things like Amazon, Google, you have access to this data in the cloud. You don't have to purchase a whole service center to be able to store it yourself. So that's one of the ways it's become much more cost effective. There's also a lot of open data initiatives which have made it the infrastructure and the software freely available to work with it. And the other side of the cost effective coin there is that it allows you to collect data over such large areas. Usually you would have to go out into either do surveys or collect that data through some other mechanism, have people on the ground going out to collect it. So that's really where the cost-effective side of it comes in.
That's really interesting. So we have this sort of potentially at our fingerprints, those huge amounts of data that, who knows, might help us, right? We just need to figure out what to do with it, right? In some cases, and I'm sure you have a lot of scenarios where you already know how to use the data best.
Yeah, it's really about asking those business questions and then trying to translate them into what the data might be able to do and provide for you. So if there's a particular question, say, what is the size of the trade potential in this region for a commodity, then you can start translating that into how I can use the satellite imagery to understand both the current demand as well as that historic demand, which is a predictor of the future.
Which is something that we also discussed before the event, that sort of the time lapse or time series analysis of satellite data to see how the world is changing. That obviously is giving you a lot of insight. So everyone, if you run a business, ask yourself, how can satellite data help me run a business? And if you don't know the answer, I think Jasmine is the one to talk to. Michael, you mentioned algorithmic training, and I remember that case from probably 5 or 6 years ago. Amazon. 2 bots selling a book. The book title was The Making of a Fly, Peter Lawrence's book. Probably about $13 per copy. Those algorithms were using that particular style of trading where they would put a slightly higher price for the book and then hope that someone is too lazy and buys this slightly higher book. Then they would buy the cheaper book from the other bot and and sort of send it. But no one was buying, and those two algorithms that had the same strategy sort of caught you know, every time increasing the price, right? I wrote it down. The ultimate price that was noticed by humans was $23,698,655.93 plus shipping. Until someone found out and shut down those bots. Obviously, no one would buy a book that's so expensive. What could go wrong if we have algorithmic trading?
Well, this is an example of collusiveness too, sort of automated collusiveness, right? This like almost cartel conduct where the price goes up by increments and it's kind of an agreement. Like they're programmed to do it, right? To go up by increments, and they just best each other.
It was an accidental collusion, right?
Yeah, yes, but still sort of, still some sort of collusion, right? Price fixing, or you know, fixing the price between these two entities. Regulators like the AEST, our sort of Competition and Consumer Commission, are sort of, you know, on their $20 budget. It's not $20; it's a lot more than that. But you know, they're under budgeted, but they have to now look at ways that this is happening, not accidentally, Marek, but deliberately. You know, watch your competitor and raise the price. Is that price fixing, or is it just matching the price as it goes up? And there's the difficult questions for competition law or antitrust sort of lawyers too.
So I think there's a lot that we can learn, or have to learn, actually, not can learn, but have to learn before we can live in this new world. Thank you, Michael. Murat, just a very quick question before we jump into you know, some of the juicy questions that we have from our participants. You mentioned several artificial intelligence winters that we came through. Just for the sake of, you know, everyone in the session, if you could tell us what is an artificial intelligence winter, but more importantly, do you think there is another artificial intelligence winter coming?
Well, you see, it correlates highly with economic development, and we have so much excess money in the markets right now, and investors are chasing literally for higher returns because you don't get much out of bonds, so the interest is very high, and a lot of companies start labeling them as AI. So, for example, we don't label ourselves as AI, knowing that there are all those tools in narrow AI that we can use that make life easier for us. And ultimately goes back to what Jasmine said, you need to have a proper structure in place, you know, highly structured data, people in the loop that understand the shortcomings of data, you know, that verify the data, that are after quality data. And it also goes back to what Michael said about, you know, regulating the AI space. If you look at 4, you know, stages of AI, starting as, let's say, a tool moving to become an assistant, a peer, or a manager, you need to ask yourself, do I want to use it as a tool, or do I want to be managed by AI? A lot of us don't want to be managed by AI. And then again, it depends on the level of risk that we enter. Is AI in charge of pressing the button for a nuclear weapon, or is it in charge to identify my friendship photos from my whatever photos? You know, depending on the level of risk, we have to make decisions. So when it comes back to regulation, we need to ensure, first of all, what kind of AI are we talking about? We have to, as you said, learn and create greater transparency about what AI is. Then we need to attach the risk level to it, specifically when risk is very high. And we do also know, how do we use that tool? Or is it ultimately going to manage us? Because if it's going to manage us, you want to make sure that the risk is very, very low.
Thanks, Murat. And you know, to your point about companies labeling themselves as AI, I just dug up that study from 2019. Apparently, back then, 40% of AI startups in Europe actually had no AI, right? 40% of startups that would self-describe themselves as AI. Let's jump into the questions that we're receiving. I'm sort of trying to capture what's happening in the chat, trying to capture what's happening in the Q&A. I wonder if any of our panelists wants to take those. There are 2 questions around the use of AI in military. military, right? So, you know, what if those systems become uncontrollable? What is, you know, what do we do there? And also, you know, even if we introduce regulations around AI for military purposes, you know, what if that sort of, you know, gets out of control, right? And someone uses that. Is any one of you, Murat, Michael, Jasmine, looking into the use of AI in military situations?
Well, we don't, from an ethical point of view, we don't deal with the industry as such. However, of course, we look at the applications because we monitor all innovations in that area on a daily basis. And it comes back to the risk involved. You know, am I using it for, you know, intelligence gathering to make better informed decisions? Or do I use, for example, an algorithm or a machine learning program or some kind of deep learning to run an autonomous vehicle, you know, that ultimately serves a purpose? You know, is it a rocket? Is it a plane? What is it? So I think it really depends on the risk related to it. And depending on the risk, I would rather make sure that there's always a human in the loop. Because ultimately, like in a legal setting, and that's, for example, from a legal point of view, we will never really sort out, there's always this residual risk, as you know, Michael. And that residual risk cannot be accepted by an AI. It needs to be a human that has the ultimate responsibility. And that's why whatever we do in that space should help us to make a better decision, to serve our purposes, to embody us or empower us to do things better and move away from routine stuff. If we can move towards this direction, I think this whole AI discussion will become much smoother because people will have a better understanding. They will know, oh, it's all about risk and how I'm going to use it. And ultimately, they know it's going to empower them, because the whole discussion also scares people off, because a lot of people are just afraid of losing their jobs to some kind of technology. Whereas the discussion should be about, hey, we can empower you to do better, you know, to use your intellect and go away from routine work and do the kind of work that you're made as a human being. Because no AI, even a general AI, won't be around probably in the next 25 years. It won't really reach the level of complexity that we have right now and the flexibility that we as humans have.
The International Red Cross just came out last week, I think, and said that any decision to kill or destroy something should be made by a human. Now, it's not a great probably example, but they've come out and said there should be always a human making those decisions. And in relation to risk, it's interesting that the EU regulation has taken that approach, right? It's banned outright some sort of some artificial intelligence practices, but it's put a high risk category, you know, mostly sort of biometric sort of use of AI to identify people. Those sort of high risk things, and it asks people to run risk analysis, a really detailed risk analysis of the product and its output, etc., to sort of filter those high risk to low risk applications of the AI. So it's not just, you know, regulating AI; it's a sort of the type of AI, you know, and then what application of that, you know, because a computer vision process can be used to, you know, for a robot to pick a tomato, but it can also be used to pick your face and put you in jail. What use of that particular AI system or that AI capability are we regulating? Just another fine grain of problem.
It's similar to what Michael and Murat have said. I think having that human in the mix is really important as the ultimate deciding factor of how the AI is used. And also keeping in mind that AI is just a tool for us to make decisions and to hopefully make better decisions and to empower us to make change in the world as well. Kind of a flip side on the military side of things is that there's been a lot of technology that's been developed in the military, and sometimes that is put into civilian use and often has really good practical applications. So it's not necessarily about just producing that for the military, it's filtering through to other civilian uses as well.
Thank you, Jasmine. And this is really interesting because, you know, what is happening right now as we're wrapping the event. Jasmine, you've basically captured, you know, a lot of the conversations that that we've had throughout the past 40 minutes or so. So thank you so much for helping me, you know, wrap the event as well. But indeed, everyone, when we had a couple of briefing conversations before this session, one of the questions that we asked ourselves was, you know, what is the message that we want to convey to everyone as the whole, you know, as the whole panel? And you know, our answer was, we don't know. We'll see how this conversation goes, right? And how did this conversation go? Clearly everyone, Jasmine, Michael, Murat, we're all talking about that need for a human in the loop. We all were talking about the fact that artificial intelligence, whether it's coming through, you know, computer vision, natural language processing, building networks, or creating algorithmic trading systems, ultimately artificial intelligence in trade and in international trade is just a tool that helps us be more efficient at what we're doing, right? It's not, to what Murat said, you know, it's not a, you know, an all-encompassing general AI that starts to behave like human. I think we are past that perception, thankfully, past that perception of AI as, you know, an omnipotent entity, and we're rather seeing it as an army of those, you know, small yellow minions that are sort of running around and are helping us achieve our goals, right? Maybe that's not the best example, right? Because the minions were always working for the GRU. You know, you can see what I'm watching with my kids. Everyone, we're hitting the 6:55 here locally. I'm based in Brisbane in Australia, and that's 6:55 here, which is a cue for me to hand over to Bill Cole in a second. I wanted to thank everyone for asking those juicy and very interesting questions, for maintaining a really interesting conversation in the chat as well as we were discussing. Most importantly, I wanted to thank our panelists, Jasmine, Michael, and Murat, for the wonderful discussion and for sharing your expertise with everyone here. Once again, thank you, and over to Bill.
Thank you, Marek. It was just fascinating sitting here, hearing the incredible depth of understanding being shared with the audience. But my right eye was also looking at a stream of questions, and if I characterize a lot of the themes, I must say that risk looms large in the audience in terms of how these endeavours will progress and the consequences. And I think that's a useful motif to loop back the themes of this evening to the activities of Noor and the Queensland AI Hub, because it seems to me that increased transparency and education regarding AI and digitalisation and its limitations, its applications, and its value will go a long way to, I suppose, engendering further research, but importantly incorporating the current learnings into a more generalised setting in our trading environment. And I think that will go a long way to allay the concerns that have been expressed tonight. On that note, I genuinely thank the speakers and the Queensland AI Hub for your time and your collaboration. I think it's an extraordinary opportunity, and I think Noor, we've spoken prior to this session about how we can come up with more and interesting events around the same issues. So hopefully we'll be able to cast a wide net and capture you all again for more and interesting events. I need to advise you all that you will have an opportunity to discuss this event if you attend the Thursday the 27th networking event in Sydney, held by professionals in international trade at Beer Deluxe. I've got no personal experience of these establishments, but I'm told that the evenings are quite vibrant. And finally, I'd like to introduce the audience to my colleague on the board, Hubert Baskin, who is our executive board member with carriage of membership. Hubert, please.
Thank you very much, Bill. Yeah, as you said, it was really fascinating discussion, especially around the satellite data efficiency regulation, as well as the ecosystem intelligence and narrow AI. So it was very interesting. Thank you, everybody. So as Bill mentioned, my name is Hubert. I'm from Pitt, looking after the membership. This year we launched our paid membership offering, and I'll just send you a link in the chat. We already have a couple of members. Right now, our 3K benefit to join is first and foremost get access to discounted events when you have face-to-face event and free webinar, which you just witnessed tonight. Another one which is quite interesting is you can also find out about opportunities. It can be opportunity about trade, it can be opportunity about career. And finally, which probably is one of the best value that Pitt can offer, we actually have a very good balance between government members, private sector members, as well as academia, and also your support services related to trade. So if you join us, you can actually access that network, which is very interesting. We will be launching new offering in the year and also the next few years. So stay tuned on that. And on that note, if you have any question, you can reach me on LinkedIn or you can reach to the website. I'm happy to answer any question you have. And overall, I think it's been a great night. Thank you for the event committee to Pitt to organize. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Marek, to moderate it. Thank you, Michael, Murat, and Jasmine. And thank you very much for all the participants. We hope to see you in the next event, either face-to-face or webinar. So everybody have a good day, evening, or morning, depending where you're based, and hope to see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone.